Hi, everyone. Good evening. You can say it back to me. Thank you. Thank you. Uh, Let me have the music lowered really quick. Or we can just vibe a little bit. Okay, hey. While that's figured out, the soundtrack to this music, or this speech, my name's Joseph Otter. I'm the Director of Cultural Programs here at the Fifth Avenue Hotel, which I feel like the majority of you have never been inside, which is like understandable because it opened 1 year ago. So welcome. And if you have, there's a few of you. Welcome back. Everyone else, pay attention to them. Keep coming back because it's fun here. This evening with Rhode Island School of Design, hold for applause. Thank you. Oh, there we go. This evening with Rhode Island School of Design is part of the hotel's Holistic Cultural Experiences Initiative, which takes many forms from panel discussions, more intimate conversations, performances, masterclasses, wellness experiences, etc. We'll get there. Was that funny, Sarah? Dr. Sarah Cunningham? Where was I? We do a lot of really fun things like panel discussions on sustainability during Climate Week and the UN General Assembly. I will not go too much further into that. And I will then simply thank the team at RISD, very specifically Sarah Zana, who designed every visual element you're seeing. Catherine Cooper, who is at the bar. And of course, our moderator this evening, Dr. Sarah Cunningham. Sarah B. Cunningham. What's the B?
Yeah,
Beaver? Never mind. Apart from that, I'll end by being one of the first to properly acknowledge a group of people in the room who are going to be overwhelmed with praise this evening, which are the finalists of the Terra Carta Design Lab, which is really so impressive. So network with them and support their endeavors. And with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah for a little bit more about tonight's panel. And thank you, panel.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So welcome everyone to Haptic Futures. This is a panel conversation presented by Fifth Avenue Hotel and Rhode Island School of Design. I want to note that this is a super awesome audience. So you don't know who's sitting next to you, but like there's some tremendous minds and thinkers and nonconformists and activists in the room. So you should feel that power that's here today. We're really grateful that Fifth Avenue Hotel presents this cultural programming that lets us come together. And thank you so much, Joe, Director of Cultural Programming, for supporting this event. So for those of you who might not know, Rhode Island School of Design is actively engaged in research and development related to new materials and sustainability. Thanks to His Royal Highness King Charles and the Sustainable Markets Initiative, RISD, the National Institute of Design in India, Dubai Institute of Design and Innovation, and the Royal College of Art currently have teams of alumni and students inventing new solutions and business models to build more sustainable markets. You see these projects and solutions around you. RISD's teams are highlighted here and showcased at New Lab's Climate Futures event tomorrow at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. In November, the teams from each school, 2 teams from each school, will be selected for an award of £100,000 to launch their businesses and launch their activity. So I'd like to invite the Terra Carta Design Lab finalists to stand and be recognized. Thank you all so much. This is the future. This is the future. So last week, RISD also announced the next stage of our research with Hyundai Motor Group, the Regeneration Studio. This develops biomimicry-inspired new materials and structures for the future of mobility. This is a multi-year project that learns from nature's design. And for many of you who've been to RISD or know RISD, it's centered around RISD's Nature Lab. This is a space that has been educating artists and designers for over 80 years to connect with the natural world and produce novel experiments. Thank you, Nature Lab. Whatever research you might look to, we're finding that the Earth is now in serious trouble on a number of fronts, especially also for communities that are unable to rebuild or move or adapt to the climate crises we're facing. And many of us are working in business and industries that are meeting with more regulatory standards. We are looking at our supply chains. We're moving to eco-based biomaterials. We're looking at modular and repairable materials. So there's a wide range of activity happening to rethink how our daily lives function and how business and industry functions. But we also have a whole generation of eager new young artists and designers who are engaged in proposing solutions to these old systems. So we come together today because we see radical efforts of designers, artists, educators, and activists addressing these imbalances. We see creative practitioners employing a sort of stereoscopic vision where we think on larger systems levels, understanding impacts that extend beyond the human lifetime, while also instituting small-scale experiments, redesigns, and actions that start to completely transform prior systems of manufacture, of materials, of customer behavior. I'd like to welcome our panelists, each of whom has a deeply ambitious perspective about the ways art, biology, design, and new social alliances will move us into a new haptic future. So let me introduce and welcome SangYup Lee, Executive Vice President and Head of Hyundai and Genesis Global Design Center.
Thank you. Very nice meeting you guys.
Charlotte McCurdy, Designer and Terra Carta Project Advisor. Andrew Haarsager, the former head of Retail Innovation Lab at Cartier and the founder of Land, which is a retail startup focused on climate resilience. Andrew. And Céline Semaan, the founder of Slow Factory. We're grateful to have you here. And Celine's new book, which is announced tomorrow night at BAM, is over on one of the tables in the corner. So please check out her new book, A Woman is a School. Thanks for being here, Céline. So to start our conversation, I'll ask each of our panelists a question. We'll engage in a conversation, and then maybe have a couple of questions from the audience if we have time. So SangYup, welcome. It's so good to see you. We're curious to learn about how Hyundai is leading the way in new materials. How do your future design teams help shape material innovation in your industry?
First of all, I'm very happy and excited to be here in the RISD panel discussion in Climate Week. It is a very important role, I personally believe, a designer is to help others. So I think it's a very important that progress for humanity, our vision for the brand is so important, play key roles over here. And obviously, sustainable, not only the material, the whole process and everything it's not an option. It's something that we have to take seriously. Obviously, our brand, the Motor Group, Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis, we're challenging and quite a bit. And I must say, we are one of the front runner in the automotive industry. We're using quite extensively, for example, Hyundai Ioniq 5 has 32 PET bottles. We make a thread out of it, extensively used in our interior. For Kia, the recycled fishnet has been heavily applied into the vehicle. So not only that, all the natural pigment, the bamboo charcoal, and also recycled material like the used tire that we utilize quite a bit. But even though we challenge a lot, but it's not enough, because cars annually produced about 80 million vehicles, and you can imagine after 10, 20 years after their life cycle, what that's going to be. So it was a huge responsibility for automotive makers to consider sustainability very deeply in that sense. So, and we all know that majority of the materials in the cars are either steel or plastic. And European Union, they're gonna force automotive, the company, more than 25% of the plastic has to be recycled from the car. But for me, that is still not enough. So I think it's a very important responsibility. How can we use a sustainable material to more sustainable circularity in the automotive business? Because right now, the automotive business is basically, you put A, that reserve B is coming out. The whole nature that we've been working together is about all circularity. It's a self-cleaning system. So I think this is something that we are challenging as we more get into the future society. And this is what we can do for our next generation, we clearly believe.
SangYup, can I just follow up briefly and ask you, you are responsible for the 3 brands at Hyundai and really...
Not Kia, but Hyundai and Genesis.
Yeah,
yes.
Hyundai and Genesis, 2 brands. Thank you. And what role does design play in this endeavor to sort of create new materials, transform the way you're making cars?
I think that design is a very first part of the building a car. So I think that we not only we develop beautiful car and emotional engagement, but also the story and what type of product, what mission that we have to bake into it. So this is why that one of the big mission that we have is how to apply the circularity and sustainable material in forward to moving it, because it's simply because a car that you see on the street, that was a car we designed like 5 to 6 years ago. Car that we're designing right now is coming out from 3 to 4 years from now on. So it's a very form runner. So we have to challenge, not necessary to make a lot of friends in the company, but the mission to deliver the value. So I think therefore that roles of design is much greater than back in the days in the traditional automotive perspective. So the mission is to have creating the value to help others. If that is the core of the designer's mission, we can do a lot and everything. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that insight. Really appreciate it. Turning to you, Charlotte.
Yeah.
So you have unusual experience working in existential threats and biomaterial innovation. Your algae sequin dress was just in the Met Sleeping Beauties exhibit, if anyone saw that, as part of a Slow Factory collaboration. You've described your work as nonfiction art. How must design and art reorient the public imagination toward regenerative materials?
Fantastic. Great to be here, too. I would say that in terms of the potential I see, the potential I'm passionate about for art and design to contribute to perhaps help shape public imagination, perhaps help shape public demand for change. Part of that comes from the question that art and design can ask. I feel like so often in the climate space, the question is, what can we do? What can we do? And art and design shows up with the question of what could we do? Mm-hmm. And can implies that we're choosing from a set menu that's defined. And an artist and designer mindset is, let's get back in the kitchen. Let's see if we can make new dishes. Let's go back to how we source. Let's forage for some new ideas and come back with something delicious and exciting that makes people want to be part of that new alternative that we're offering. So the opportunity for artists and designers, and it's so exciting to see the Terra Carta teams in person after working with them over the last year. They are coming to the table with new, delicious ideas that are exciting, they're cool, they make it possible to achieve change because they are welcoming. They bring people into these alternative materials that aren't just a desaturated version of what we have right now. They are whole new aesthetic, cultural vocabularies that we can use to create community and belonging and excitement and meet human need in beautiful ways. So that's why I'm in design, and that's why I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Turning to you, Andrew. So your work is changing from founding an innovation lab at Cartier to launching your own venture, which is addressing the consumer connection to sustainability. What's your approach to finding a balance between the consumer's desire for functionality and beauty with the urgent need for environmentally responsible goods? This contrast, we're trying to change this engagement.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll answer the question in a couple of different ways. Starting from the perspective of the luxury industry, most of us experience luxury brands through their product. The product is the first thing that comes to mind. And I think, for a brand like Cartier or a brand that makes jewelry and watches, there's something that is kind of inherently an advantage in sustainability terms, because instead of making a product that gets disposed of at the end of its useful life, on the contrary, those products are designed to have an essentially infinite life, where you keep that item for your entire life and then pass it on to your children, and as that time goes on, more meaning goes into that product. And so that's a really good place to start from. But there's also a lot of work that needs to be done here, because those brands, they also suffer from a problem, which is that the brand itself is built around really old beliefs around what is precious. What we consider precious, rare materials, things that are expensive, things that feel good. And a lot of times the customer for those products is going to come in and expect, if they're buying a luxury watch, they would look for a calfskin or crocodile strap to that watch, period. That would be for them what the belief in luxury would be. And changing those perceptions is very, very tough. So Cartier did come out with a watch that has a vegan leather strap, that there's photovoltaic energy production underneath the Roman numerals. Those things are happening, but it's a slow process to change the kind of desirability that, that products in that category have. There's also a lot of nuance in talking about that kind of product and how it's produced. If you look at things like precious stones, a lot of people would perceive a lab-grown diamond to be more ethical than a diamond that's sourced from the earth. But if you dig into the reality of that, beyond the marketing messages, lab-grown diamonds, the energy that's required to produce a lab-grown diamond is really no joke. It's super, super high. And on the other side of that, diamonds that are sourced from the earth, a lot of communities that have produced, that are built around mines all around the world, have been that way for decades, if not centuries, and have really mature economies that rely on that product export. And so changing the desirability of that product does have an impact directly on those communities. And so it's a really complicated question. There's not a perfect answer to that. But it highlights the kind of struggle that company has. I'd also like to answer the question from the point of view of the operations of a business like that, because being in a retail business, talking about a large luxury company, this is maybe common to all of them or many of them. You would have a group that owns the brand. the brand has an HQ in one particular kind of core location. That then controls regional markets, which each have their own HQ, and then each of those has embedded in it tons of boutiques. So when a decision is made up here at the group level about something that might need to be done in every transaction at every boutique, suddenly you've got an immense network of activity happening. And so those problems are really unglamorous to solve. If you start looking into, say the problem is, okay, every time a transaction happens, the sales associate needs to go into the back of house and print out a piece of paper that goes out somewhere. Printing out a single piece of paper isn't in and of itself a hugely terrible act, but when you multiply that across all transactions in that boutique, across all boutiques in that country, multiplied by all of the markets around the world, suddenly you have a really significant problem that needs to be solved, at that little level. And so, as I said, those problems are unglamorous to solve. You start looking at why those things happen, it might take you ages to, sort through all of the different kind of codes of conduct and behavioral manuals and so on. You get to the end of that investigation and you pull the Scooby-Doo mask off of the villain, and it's always some kind of policy that was decided, at the highest level because of maybe like the relationship that the business has with an insurer or, a term in a contract. And so those are the things that need to change, and those kinds of policies are like the neural material of a corporation. And so to change those is to make the corporation relearn its behaviors. And so even if at that transactional level you might say, okay, we can just replace that with a PDF and then there'll be no material. It's never that easy. It's never a kind of technical constraint. It's always that villain is policy. To talk about the startup that you mentioned, so I left Cartier a couple of weeks ago to focus on this. This is very fresh.
Very fresh.
But the thing is, it's also based on old beliefs. I want to say, so the belief that this is based on is, or the truth of kind of human desire for community and for behaving in communal and mutually supportive ways. The business Land.Supply, if anyone would like to sign up for the email list, it is about helping people understand what their risk exposure is to increased hazards from weather being made worse by climate change, and then having a kind of retail business that's based on those individual risk profiles. And that comes from speaking to people who are just like me, not specifically working in areas of sustainability, but just being average professionals, looking outside their window and plainly seeing what are changing weather patterns, having gone through COVID and seeing empty shelves in the grocery store. So people really becoming more aware of the vulnerability that we have in our reliance on complex systems, which themselves are vulnerable to shocks. And so when you start looking at how to be less vulnerable or to take your individual risk down from those kinds of issues, there's a retail industry for that. It's like looking at, shelf-stable food and water filters and things like that, those kinds of disaster preparedness supplies. And there's an existing retail industry for that, but it is basically across the board marketed in terms of fear. There are retailers there that sell weapons alongside food. There's a kind of fundamentally antisocial attitude in those brands because the brands are saying to people, okay, something bad's going to happen. You need to make a supply of stuff to be less vulnerable to that. And then you need to get weapons to protect your supply of stuff against your neighbors who are going to come try to take it from you when disaster happens. But that's actually, if you look into how people behave in disaster scenarios, that's the opposite of how they behave. People become more pro-social during times of crisis. There's a wonderful book by Rebecca Solnit called A Paradise Built in Hell that's about this, looking back through 200 years of disaster history, and people they have an earthquake, their house gets knocked down, they are in the rubble pulling their stove out so that they can cook soup for their neighbors. And so I think building a brand around that impulse that people have to be something that's more pro-social encourages people to be prepared as an act of care for others, making you less likely to panic and more likely to behave in communal ways. And I think behaving as a part of a community versus as an individual is a kind of mindset that we all need to have as we transition to a more sustainable economy.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was a great transition to talking with Céline. I think also we are moving toward thinking about how redesigning the human actually is part of what we're doing in order to impact the world. Céline, it's great to have you here. You've worked with our Terra Carta program and our Center for Complexity. You demand for us to have radical imaginations for more liberatory practices and to rebuild our systems with a view to human rights. Material innovation and sustainability have a real human impact. Kind of Andrew was leading up to that. Are our imaginations radical enough? What are some ways we can be thinking about breaking through the systems to achieve change?
What a great question. Thank you so much. Wow, how can I follow everyone? This is so fun. Designing for the real world. What could we do? Not what can we do. I love that. And your stories about systems and culture and how we relate to these systems. So I want to start by just one thing that I always say, which is that the systems that we exist in are invisible, right? Unless they are not working in your advantage. And I often say it's when you're on the phone with customer service and the person is like, ma'am, I can't do it. And so that's when you're like, oh, what is going on? Why is this system not working for me? And for people who are working in design and building objects and building experiences and building maybe something that's all of the above, object and experience, we think about the systems that are around these objects. And that's exactly what, we realize, that these systems are impacting people. It's about people and people interacting with one another and the cultures we put around these systems, or the value or the status. For instance, what is valuable, what is luxury, what is rare. And oftentimes we think it's a rare material, but what's rare is very much the oxygen that we're breathing and the water that we're drinking. These are rare materials that we are facing every day. And unless we shift the perspective about what is precious, we often think what is precious is outside of us, when there's a lot of things that are precious within us as well. So at Slow Factory, we work in many layers. So it feels like the systems that we look at are designed. Of course, it's complex. That's why I loved working with the Center for Complexity. And I love the opportunity to work in mapping systems and designing frameworks around these systems. And for us at Slow Factory, the frameworks we are designing are around cultural change. How do we change culture so that not only the consumer can be more sustainable, because that is boring, we know it's not there, but how the C-suite can be more conscious about what they're doing, and how the C-suite can be more aware and inclusive in their decision, for instance, so that it doesn't trickle down to, let's have them print this paper, and then this paper times X equals hundreds of forests being burned for nothing, and therefore, we could have changed that mindset at the start of it. And I always think also that we are all designers, even though we may not think that way. And when I work with organizations and industries, I like to empower everybody to think like a designer and to be a designer, because a designer is not just someone looking at making it pretty, but it's making it work for the real world, like making it so that this thing that we're thinking about is not harming our planet and it's not harming people in the process. Now, people think, oh, well, there's a necessary evil. If you want to get something, somebody got to pay the price for it. But what if it's not that way? What if it doesn't have to be that way? It really doesn't have to be that way. It's not a constraint that we have just accepted as a fact at Slow Factory. And I feel like many people that we work with have seen that, yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. We can really change that. And we're seeing this in amazing designers and creators and inventors that are not thinking in ways that, oh yeah, it is what it is, I'm just going to design a way around it, but designing what it could be, and how if we were to change that, it's often about policy change. So when we're thinking about designing change, it's about culture. Culture drives most of the change that we see that ends up becoming a policy. It never is the other way around. There's never a policy that's being imposed unless it's a fascist government, which we have seen it work sometimes under guns, and we are seeing more and more of that. But it is often the other way around, where culture really drives the change that we're seeing in governments, that the changes that we end up seeing in policies, because we are all relating to the products and each other through the stories that we're telling about these products. And designing that story, designing that experience is also part of the design of the object itself. So I feel like what we do is really embracing the complexity, not shying away from it, and trying to explain it in a way that is as inspiring and as engaging as possible, knowing that you got that part, now there's this part, and now there's this part, and now, you know, and being able to travel with our partners as far and as deep as we can. And sometimes we get stuck in the superficial, and it is what it is. Sometimes that's how industry works, but we are relentless. We know that this can change.
Yeah, yeah. Mm. Thank you so much for that. It's just a wonderful insight to have from all of your work and practices as you're sort of seeing deeply into the landscape ahead of us, like the horizon ahead of us. Can you talk about maybe to convert the negative to a positive in some way? I wonder if any of you could speak to the questions that are not being asked. You sort of allude to those, and sometimes, you know, you're working as a consultant or as a designer, and you're kind of like, I wish the client would ask this question. You know, so I'm kind of interested in hearing a little bit about what are the questions that we're not asking that would allow things to shift just enough that we can begin to build these cultures and policies that are more resilient than what we have right now.
I think it's a financial question, to be honest. The questions that are not being asked is, you know, we're talking about impact, but who's going to pay for that impact? Who's going to put in funding towards that impact that we're all agreeing we have to do? And the questions that aren't being asked, that I think from my vantage point, is how do we design a financial system that is in support of our environment and human rights? Mm-hmm. I think the financial system by default is at the expense of our planet and our people. And so right now the invitation, not only do we need to design materials, but we need to redesign our financial systems to work in favor of our humanity, our democracy, our laws, as well as our human rights. And the financial system right now is just a given. Oh, money's dirty, money's this, money's that. Mm-hmm. Oh, if you want to get something done, somebody's got to pay the price. It really doesn't have to be this way. It really doesn't have to be designed like that. And so who's going to fund that?
I think that's a very good perspective, because we got to have a system. And before that, we got to have a culture. But for me, the prior to that is obviously the mindset, mm-hmm. of a willingness. And this is also the biggest challenge for me as a designer. And the big corporate, there's many divisions. We all know how important there's a climate change. It's actually, in Korea, it was like almost like a monsoon rain, the heaviest rain in the history. A lot of cars got drowned. And the product planning, there's nobody really challenging the product planning based upon climate change. Mm-hmm. So I think that is one perspective. And the other perspective is a good point, finance. Okay, designers love to do the sustainable materials, and then if company does not make money, then it's basically you're out of business.
You don't have a job anymore.
You can save the world if you don't have make money. So it's about the balance, and also at the same time, as Céline mentioned, some superficial level of the challenges. For me, there's still a lot of those, because we're talking the vegan leather, but like pretty much all the vegan leather is a plastic. Mm. Then why we even calling it leather? It's actually we are in a way lying to ourselves. So for me, it's actually including finance structure and it's about consensus, the evolving to get in the same mindset is so important, mm-hmm. and which is something we have to. Mm-hmm. It's a mission.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Andrew, Charlotte. Questions were not response to these comments, or questions that we're not asking?
Yeah, formulate an answer to this. I think, where my mind goes is the tension between what people in developed nations can do to become more sustainable, are there cases where that's in tension with what less developed nations are able to do, and the kind of expectation that, you know, a nation like ours, which built the quality of life that we have absolutely through extractive and exploitative means, and less developed nations are even right now suffering the biggest climate impacts of those decisions. I think there's a real absolute and serious tension between, you know, the need for us all to make different choices on how we develop things moving forward, with the right of less developed nations to, are they wrong to imagine they should do the same kinds of extractive things to increase their quality of life? And, you know, I think that's a really difficult conversation to have, and no one in this room is empowered to make choices that are powerful enough to solve those issues, but that to me is a pretty big elephant in the room.
I would probably ask a question that I feel like is weaving some interesting themes across. I want to ask the question, where does value come from? And I want to use that word value in terms of the financial, but also the emotional, in terms of how do we, it connects to, like, are we in a place of trade-offs, or how do we get out of an extraction mindset where things are zero sum and we're taking from one place and moving to the other? Can we learn from nature, which is not zero sum, it is not extractive, it is generative? Can we start to grow something that is valuable and not merely take in order to create value? And in that spirit, like, it's not just a company can't continue to do good work if they don't make money, but they also can't do good work if they can't hire employees, because no one wants to work for them. So there's different kinds of value that organizations are generating, and how do we grow and protect all of those? That would be my question.
Yeah, thank you so much. You all have so much knowledge to share, and as we work with RISD students every generation, we're thinking about these very dense, we were talking about complexity, we're thinking about these very dense questions. Then we have this new generation of thinkers emerging in our finalists here, but also with all the students at RISD and other art and design schools. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what role the education sector might play in this work in order to sort of foster mindsets, provide information, provide education that allows for a more empowered next generation to come forward and be doing the work that you're talking about. Because I think sometimes we're faced with systems that some of us have been working within for a long time, and we sometimes feel like there's no entry point, there's no affordance, how are we gonna move through it? Some of us have like an incredible sheer determination that will bring us through to the other side to solutions, or we come in partnership with others to move through what we feel are unacceptable conditions. But as this next generation of artists and designers comes on the scene, I just wonder like what your thinking is about that, and what responsibility a school like RISD has in order to participate in that conversation in the way that we do, which is, you know, about, you know, these mindsets, supporting certain mindsets, supporting certain awarenesses.
I think the greatest example, one of the good examples, is the Hyundai and the RISD collaboration through the Nature Lab. And this is that we are really committed with each other to creating the design process learned from nature and wisdom from nature and bake into the system together. Because if you really question to most of our design schools globally is really based upon Bauhaus philosophy based on industrialization. And therefore, schools has many different departments, the graphic design, industrial design, car design, and architect, and you name it. This is all about creating the specialist. Mm-hmm. But for me, that we need more generalist in design. Why only architects allowed to do the space design. It does not make sense. And the process of the developing product, the creating the value, can come from many different aspects of it. And this is why for us is a nature lab. The project is so important. The first of all, it's a different system. It's not about the Bauhaus system. It's actually learn from nature, and in every aspect of it, from the deep learning, deep observation, to circularity process. So, and then we have a multidisciplinary student from all different departments. Same thing for us, and we're sending not only our designers, but also our engineers and our product planning. I try to get involved finance people, but they didn't say yet. Eventually I will. So I think those collaboration kind of breaking the silo from the internal organization. And for us in a Hyundai big company, it's a very difficult to get out of your daily job. So we're sending the people over there to really spend the time together. And because when you are in the system, it's very difficult to break it. But when you move yourself to somewhere else completely new, it's actually much easier. So that is so important. And this is the commitment. Usually the company does a one, maximum 2-year project, but we've been going on for the last 7 years. And it's very important that we're slowly applying not only the projects. For example, deep learning, I get so fascinated by shark skin. Is the skin texture is unbelievable. It's the least amount of resistance to the water, but at the same time, it's got a peak at the end of it, so it kills the bacteria. So it's a texture itself does the most aerodynamic. At the same time, it's actually antibacterial material. What if we can make a material like this applying to the surface, that we don't have to have a UV all the time to kill the germ, and also at the same time, then new material could cause to the new manufacturing system, which car industry has been doing for the last 120 years. Because, I mean, same thing, the car is basically Henry Ford 1903, the Model T is basically what it is right now. So, like steels and plastic, I think this is something that we're challenging at the same time. We are doing exhibition annually, and some of it is unbelievable. I wish I can go there to 6 months up and doing the projects.
I hope we have some storytelling about
I
this.
have my job security, so I could. So, but this is a great example, I must say.
Thank you, SangYup. And I would just want to recognize we have 2 sustainability fellows in the room. Sungyoung Lee is here from Hyundai, senior designer, in the front row. And Jaeun Bai from Kia, senior designer. So just recognize their work. Thank you guys for being here so much. But just turning to other panelists, comments about this question about learning, education, and mindset.
I feel like I want to jump in and also talk a little bit about what we did together, Charlotte. Like Charlotte and I met through a program at Slow Factory that we created to teach collaborations. So it was inspired by my experience at MIT Media Lab, where we were encouraged to work with engineers, work with artists, work with sociologists, work with environmentalists, and agree very much with what you were saying about the fact that we need generalists, yes, but we also need collaboration. So the program that Charlotte participated in was called 1x1, 1 by 1, and it was one designer with one scientist that we paired together, gave them a grant each, and basically encouraged a collaboration between science and design. And that space offered us a way to translate science to designers and translate design to scientists, because they work in another framework with another understanding and other parameters. And so when we were able to come together between science and design, we were able to accelerate innovation faster than one person on their own working with people in their field and their peers. And this type of cross-pollination accelerated so many really cool innovations. In fact, the dress that Charlotte created for Philip Lim ended up now in the museum of the Met. And there were other examples. For instance, there was a scientist who was working on a lab-grown leather for so many years, and it was still in a petri dish for so many years. And the moment we paired them with a designer, suddenly we had a bag, and suddenly we had a shoe, and we were able to see the limitations of that material and how she had to push it to meet industry standards faster from a sort of science meets design perspective. Because if it was only science, it would have been a whole other process. But because design was being embedded in the innovation, we were able to teach collaboration. And I think folks are often, folks in those fields are often working alone, or if they are working with someone else, it's someone in their field. They're not going to invite someone completely outside of their field to challenge them, especially at an early stage. So that program was very precious and very important in terms of observing change, observing rapid innovation, and also this idea of education was to inspire collaboration. Because oftentimes we go on stages and we say, we need to collaborate together, but we have no framework for collaboration. We really don't. And in the beginning of that program, it was a headache because we felt like the designers were divas and the scientists were divas as well. And then we were like, not you, Charlotte, you were the only one. You were the best. You were the best. But it's true that like we had to basically resolve a lot of conflict, especially in certain teams where we're like, oh my gosh, we have to explain to this group that this is how it works, and we have to explain to this group that yes, scientists, designers are going to want it to look good. It has to look good, Yes. So it was a very beautiful program, and I'm sad to say that the program only lasted a year because of COVID, but this program and the framework around it is ready for another year.
Yeah.
And there's so many, like we would love to pair all of these amazing designers and innovators with someone at the opposite end of their field that could just accelerate their innovation forward. So
I think I can only agree to what Céline mentioned,
Yeah.
because it's about collaboration to understanding between the multidisciplinary. I think that RISD Nature Lab project is a really key example for that. I think it's, although I disagree that designers are diva.
I'm a designer too, but the scientists were like,
joking.
what is that?
I'm just joking, yeah. But I think it's one of the having a collaboration in multidisciplinary is actually great practice to able to switch the language. Because if I'm a designer, when I talk to an engineer, if I don't switch the language, it's very difficult to communicate. Same thing, even to the finance people. I mean, designers are not usually good at numbers, but I have to figure the number before to talk to them. So I think that multidisciplinary, the work is very important, which is the eventually educational system has to more in that way. So I'm really glad that you mentioned.
I would just pick up that thread. I feel like there's something about collaboration and about what you're describing about being able to break out of the system and have that be a generative place. There's something about education as being reaching across distance and difference. And for the recent RISD alums and current students, as a mentor in that space, I'm supposed to be an educator and they're the learner, but all of us are learners and educators all the time. So in that context, I was an eager learner, but all of us have the opportunity to help as educators, and maybe formally in a school like RISD, to help draw the maps for those systems, for that printing paper trail, so that young people, idealistic people, people who have a vision and a determination can avoid the vortexes and find the islands with the treasure and move faster with our help. And so that's sort of my hope for education formally, and what I hope I can do with the students I teach in mentorship or in formal education is I only know what I know, but if I can draw that map and help them go a little bit farther to the edge than I did. Like, that's education for me.
That's a beautiful model that suggests that also when you're faced with an extraordinary challenge, you need to find your colleagues with which you draw your treasure maps. And if you have the map, it might not be the place, but at least you have something to guide your journey so that you can then you can get somewhere. And you might find your treasure island is actually not what you had on the map, but you actually find yourself arriving at a new place that you didn't have before. Agree with you?
I agree with all of you fully. I mean, the only thing I have to add, I think, is related to the idea of a framework for collaboration. It's something that I got from the design education, which is that creativity is an active process. You know, that great things don't necessarily always happen because you've got a single like genius auteur who has an inspiration. No. It's more about process. Leslie, you're in the audience. The plan the work and work the plan. This is something that I remember. And you know, that creates a scenario where you can look hard at a problem. You can test out different scenarios for how to address that problem. You can build group consensus. And the creative thing that you do is separate from you as a person. So it takes the ego out of it. And I think that's what creates a world where you can really experiment and find novel solutions that you never would have guessed otherwise. And it's what, you know, powers that kind of collaboration and makes those kind of cross-pollinations or intersections of different industries really possible.
Yeah, that's amazing. So that, in other words, like humility creates a doorway for new ideas.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Allows you to be multidisciplinary and collaborative. We're kind of coming on time here, but I want to give the opportunity for some questions from the audience. So I don't know if there's a couple questions we can answer while we have the panel up here. It's been so wonderful to hear about your thinking. This is hard work that comes from lots of challenging experiences. So it's a great rarity to have your insights. I wonder if there's maybe a couple of questions in the audience. Joe has a mic. Thanks so much, Joe. Maybe you could introduce yourself a little bit when you ask a question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name's Isaac Hicks. I am the Chief Technology Officer of Map Collective, one of the companies here. So happy to meet you all. So I was really interested whenever we were talking about like how things need to change and how at the human level there needs to be kind of a shift in the way that everything works, how the financial system works, et cetera, et cetera. I was just curious if you guys have had any ideas around how such an incentivization system could work and what it would look like to actually incentivize people at the individual level to contribute to such a system.
Like a reward system?
Any system, a system that doesn't lead to destruction and instead leads to more sustainable practices holistically.
If I may jump here, I would say that in many companies that we've worked with, you know, the culture of the company impacts a lot how individuals feel that they have the certain autonomy or the certain creativity, that it's allowed, you know, or that they don't have a reaction that's like, well, that's way above my pay grade, or that's not my job, you know, like when you hit those points, that very much related to the culture of the company and what you were saying earlier about being like making sure that we have not only experts but generalists in the room. In the culture of the company, if we can, you know, make sure that we're creating a space where individuals feel welcome to take initiatives. Oftentimes I find that it's never the case. It's like I should have a real data about it, but most of the companies that we've been in, foundations, companies, startups, individuals don't feel like they have room to make mistakes. Like they can't make a mistake and they cannot take initiatives because that's not their job. They don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. They don't know the boundaries where they are. And so it really starts with the culture of the company and designing a culture where folks know that each other are human beings and that certain things are shared in terms of values and that certain things, behaviors are welcome. Certain behaviors are welcome.
I think that's very important, and addition to that, also mindset of leadership in the company. What do you believe? It's so important because unless the strong leadership initiation to have a consensus with others, it's very difficult to happen in the company level. And one of the examples that, not because he's my boss, but our chairman, the group chairman, Mr. Chung, and he is a total humanist. And one time that we did a whole the value chain of hydrogen society, and basically not only making a hydrogen car, but also production and also storage and the whole value chain. And one journalist, economic journalist, is a very sharp person. He's basically asking him, Chairman, you lost money this much last year with doing hydrogen. Now you are like a quadruple, multiple of hydrogen. The value system is so obvious it's going to be K minus big time. So how do you see? How are you going to turn this around? And his answer to him was actually quite touching for me, because he basically said to him, the hydrogen value chain is not for you or for me, it's for next generation. So I think when leaders think it that way, so there's no problem I can challenge the sustainable design platform within the value, because it's very important what is the vision the leader has. If leader is all about calculating money, then it's all about calculating money. That's how I see.
Can I not answer your question? In terms of how do we create incentives at the individual level? Two non-answers. One is it's not just information. Information alone is not enough, otherwise no one would smoke. Right? Information is not enough. And the second non-answer is sort of a thread I'm hearing across here, which is that just focusing on the individual and individual choice misses these system level frameworks that determine so much of what people choose within. So yes, we need to think about the individual experience, absolutely, for a successful outcome, but it's not sufficient, I'd say, to drive change.
I think I'll take one more question. Let's see, do you want to, oh, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. Yes.
Hello. Hi, I'm Avantika. I'm one of the co-founders of Biopod. And while I have you here, thank you so much for inspiring us with your words. And I'm so incredibly motivated. So my question is, as we are trying to find our way through these islands and draw the treasure maps, this idea of legitimacy, like how do you gain legitimacy as a multi-hyphenate, as someone who's trying to draw a map that hasn't been drawn before, relying on mentors and peers and amazing congregations like this. But when you're met with circumstance and maybe like 90% of the people out there ask for the legitimacy of a designer or the legitimacy of you to talk to something that doesn't pertain to your discipline. So how do you get away from this context of a want for legitimacy or like a degree or a value, or do I have to be a scientist by practice, a specialist in this and a specialist in that to make people listen? Or like, what is your advice on these very real questions that you get asked when you're intrinsically motivated, lucky enough to find spaces where you can be and show up and grow, but it's not 90% of the people that you meet every day, and you're trying to reach that audience?
I think what you describe is a really tough scenario to be in. The idea of a state of legitimacy as a kind of matter of reputation, you know, and thinking, do you or do you not have that? I think it's, in my view, I've never had success with picturing a future state that I wanted and then trying to get to that, but more to put one foot in front of the other and do projects that are available to me that are interesting and do the best that I can with them. And through that, then you look back and suddenly you've established a kind of legitimacy that maybe you weren't expecting. Because you don't want to fight against your own expectations. Like that's really tough. There's a saying, what I think Deng Xiaoping popularized about we cross the river by touching the stones. Don't focus on the end point. Focus on the thing that you can see and the thing that you can touch now. And eventually that you will get there.
Mm-hmm. If I may add on that, I feel like legitimacy is a series of permissions that you give yourself. And I think that, you must give yourself the permission. You don't need a paper, an outside paper, to validate a curiosity, A series of curiosities could lead you towards your legitimacy that you're looking for. But even when you get there, it's not even a destination to get that legitimacy, because when you are building something that never existed before, there are other frameworks of value that appear in front of you. And one of them is making sure you're still curious, and that knowing how to give yourself permission.
Great. Thank you so much. I think with that, we'll thank our panelists so much for joining us tonight. What a wonderful, lovely conversation. Thanks to the finalists from Terra Carta. Thanks to colleagues from Sustainable Markets Initiative, Hyundai, Infosys, partners that are here in the room, alumni, and other friends of RISD. I just want to offer some thanks to Joe Vatter, who's helped us arrange this event. And then I just want to call out by name, in gratitude and humility, my colleagues who've worked closely with me: Tuba Gedesi, Catherine Cooper, Sarah Osana, Vrinda Mather, Nellie Hoffins, Claudia Morris, and Amy Devers, who are key to this event and tomorrow's events in Brooklyn. Thank you. Please enjoy some food and drink and each other's company. We look forward to seeing you again at future RISD events. Thank you.